Well, hey everybody, welcome to Spero Day, and I think I'm in the fourth installment of this series called Light of the New Year. And for the past couple weeks, I've been talking about the shadows in our life and, dealing with them. So here's a thought. What if the parts of ourselves that we try to avoid, the messy, complicated bits, what if they're not actually obstacles in our life, but they are actually the key to us becoming the truest, strongest selves? What if the shadows that we're trying to chase away or dodge, what if they're actually roadblocks, not signposts? And what if the shadows that you and I think are an enemy, they're actually a friend? For the longest time, when it came to my own spiritual centering or awakening, I thought it was no, I have to overcome my struggles. I have to win the battles against everything messy inside me, the weaknesses, the insecurity, the fear. And my job is to conquer it, fix it, bury it, you know. Why? Because that's what strong, put together spiritual people do, right? They overcome. Now, some of my shadows or things I've dealt with have certainly been about the fear of failure or not feeling like enough, like I have to prove myself. So, what I did is the goal was to fight those feelings. Those feelings are the enemy. And I need to see myself as strong and disciplined. I need to outrun these things and conquer these things. But here's what I discovered: the more I fought them, the bigger they became, the more exhausted I became. I used every faith trick, every might trick, prayed it away, asked God to take it away. Nothing worked. And then after long, long years of this, I mean, long years, when I finally came to the end of myself, I suddenly had this image in my head, this visual of me coming down into my kitchen, and sitting at the table was my shadow. All those things I was fighting and chasing away, drinking drinking a cup of coffee and had a second cup waiting for me. And it just finally hit me. It was like I said to my shadow, well, I can't chase you away. I can't fight you. So I think we're going to have to go through this life and figure out how we're going to live together. And so that began the shift. My shadows weren't the enemy that I needed to defeat, but they were awaiting my acknowledgement, my attention. And I thought the shadow was the shadow. But really, the irony was the real shadow was how I was handling my shadow. And that just kept me stuck. So over time, with a lot of realization, plenty of therapy, my spiritual life reflecting that, I just decided this isn't something I need to fight anymore. I need to bring it into light. I need to integrate it. So the question is then, how do we do that? How do we befriend our shadow? How do we integrate it into our lives? And so for most of this message today, I want to make one big point, and it's this: stop resisting and befriend your shadow, befriend your weakness, embrace it. And I really think this is one of the hearts of Christian spirituality. I mean, all you need to do is go back to St. Paul's words in the New Testament in Corinthians when he turns this whole concept upside down. And let me set this up for you. Paul is in a place of desperation. He is being plagued with something that he's suffering with. He's begging, he's pleading, he's wrestling with God take this away. In fact, what he calls it, you've heard this term, he calls it his thorn in his flesh, this relentless torment, this wound that won't heal, and it haunts him, it weakens him. And despite all of his prayers and cries to God for relief, it remains. Now, we don't know exactly what this thorn is. He never mentions it. Scholars think maybe it's something physical, maybe it's something emotional, maybe it's something circumstantial. We don't know, and that doesn't matter. What matters is this: everything in his life is about to change. He obviously comes to the end of himself. Let me read this to you. I begged God 3 times to take away this weakness from me. But then God spoke to my heart, I will be kind to you and I will help you. That will be enough for you. My power is strongest when you are weak. So I am content to be proud of my weakness. Then I know that Christ's power will be with me. So here's what we know. At first, Paul didn't accept his weakness. No, in fact, he begged for it to be taken away 3 times, maybe more. And he's begging God for relief. And this is raw and vulnerable. And the answer he got is not the answer he was looking for, which is, my power is strongest, Paul, when you are weak. So his shadow wasn't removed. Instead, the Apostle Paul woke up to something deeper. The very thing he saw as a limitation became the very place where grace showed up. So this thorn, this weakness, this struggle, it didn't end up breaking him. In fact, it awakened him. And that's the paradox we are even invited to. So really, what if the places we're desperate to escape from, what if they are actually where the transformation is waiting? And I get it. We were all taught that our strengths are the key. We need to be polished, confident, strong. We need to keep it together. And when it comes to your messiness, you keep those parts hidden. You suppress your shadows. You fight them or run from them. But here's what I found in my life, that when you do that, you don't face them, they linger. And not only do they linger, they start running the show. They start leaking out onto people you care about. They start leaking out of your life. And so these doubts, these fears, these insecurities, we think, I need to shove them down. But they never stay buried, and ignoring them doesn't work. The only way forward really is to face them and to actually befriend them. And I'll say this, if any of us are serious about spiritually growing, awakening, being centered, the second we start to go, I'm going to get healthy, I'm going to move towards healing and purpose, the moment we go, I'm headed out to those new shores, they can show up. The inner critic can come out, that voice that can go, who do you think you are? But here is the shift. The shadows aren't the obstacles. The shadows are actually the invitation, the doorway, the very place where God's presence meets us. So please, if you mark anything in what I'm saying, your spiritual, personal well-being, it's never going to come from conquering your weaknesses, but it will always come through them. It's not about our striving, but our willingness to stand in that tension of our own limitations and then let God's presence and ourselves meet us there. So certainly years and years and decades ago, the great psychologist Carl Jung, he gave us language for this. And then, a whole century of the 20th century in psychology, we advanced in this. But this goes back to the origins of our Christian tradition, that we need to face them. This is what the prophets did. This is what Jesus Christ did. And any awakening we want is going to require that. In fact, let me show you some of this in the scriptures. If you go all the way to the Hebrew scriptures, when Isaiah talks about this in Isaiah 42, the people of Israel are at a desperate place. So Isaiah, the prophet, speaks for them and says, God is going to send a servant, not someone mighty, but someone who's gentle, somebody who doesn't crush anything bruised. And it's through that the people will see and connect with God. It's not going to be someone who dominates or avoids a struggle, but it's going to be someone who moves through it with a healing presence. So it's kind of like a strength, all redefined all the way back in our own spiritual origin story. Let me read this to you. Here is my servant. I have made him strong. He is my chosen one, and I couldn't be more pleased with him. So right there, thousands of years ago, this is our invitation, not to perfection, but to transformation. What Jews call this, they call this tikkun olam. And in parts of the Jewish tradition, this phrase tikkun olam, it means repairing the world. But instead of me, a Christian minister, telling you about that, why don't we have a rabbi tell you how Judaism sees this? So, welcome one of my best friends here in Nashville, Rabbi Flip Rice of the synagogue congregation, Micah. Flip, well, I've kind of mentioned to my congregation Isaiah 9. And so this Hebrew phrase, and I'll let you pronounce it, it is
Tikkun olam. Tikkun olam.
Tikkun olam. So in the Jewish concept of this, what is this phrase? What does it mean?
Tikkun olam is this ancient mystical concept known as healing the world. And the ancient mystics believed that when the world was first created, there was a great shattering. Think of like glass, like breaking, and that it is the responsibility. We are able to respond to this. It is incumbent upon us to find all the broken shards and assist and help putting the world back to the place where it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It's an arduous task, but we say it is not our job to complete the task, but nor are we free to desist from contributing to it. The phrase is ancient and mystical, but it has been sort of used often by more secular or less religious Jews who are looking to, in fact, help be the agents by which we heal the world. And therefore, social action, social justice programs, advocating for the underprivileged, marching, praying with our feet. These are all things we can do that can help make the world a better place.
And it is such a beautiful concept. Flip, I'm talking to the congregation about, dealing with our inner life and our shadow life. Can this concept, can it also be applied to our inner life?
I mean, the answer is there's no reason that it isn't. For the most part, we don't often think of it that way. We think about how it is we go about helping other people. But I definitely think how are we going to help the world if we ourselves feel a little broken? David, maybe I'll mention there are believed to be 613 mitzvot commandments that are sort of derived from the Bible. They're not just listed. I mean, we think of the top 10, right? But there are all these other commandments that were derived by rabbis. And the notion would be that they help make the world a better place. So if somebody is sick, we're supposed to visit and call upon them and check on them. If someone has lost a loved one, we're supposed to pay a Shiva call, visit their home, and offer condolences. And so these are things that help the other people, but they're also very self-reflective, right? If I go to the hospital, I'm very conscious I'm not in the hospital. Or if I go to children's hospital, I'm very aware my children are not in the hospital. And so while they are meant to help make the world a better place, they also end up working on our character and making us better people.
So I love this phrase, tikkun olam, the whole idea of bringing together shattered glass, restoring all the shards and the pieces. It's really a beautiful picture. And what I love about this is that what you think of amazing work, it happens through the weaknesses of regular people. And so sometimes healing is fixing external issues, but many times it's not. It's about surrendering illusions, meeting our wounds with courage, and letting the struggle refine us into the people of depth and wisdom that we can be. This is sacred work. Sometimes it's slow work, but it's the real work of spirituality. This is even what Christ's incarnation reveals to us. In the New Testament, Jesus doesn't hover over his humanity, he enters it. Not as a conqueror, he's born as a child. And Christ never escapes his suffering, but is the archetype of how to live fully in it and through it. And we see this in his baptism, which harkens back to this Isaiah 42 passage. In our Christian tradition, we view that servant in Isaiah 42 as then the fulfillment of Jesus. Now, Jews don't view it that way, and don't insult a Jewish person by thinking they should. They are welcome to their own view of this. But in our view, at Christ's baptism, the heavens open up, and Jesus' Father says, "This is my Son, and I'm already pleased with him." And then Jesus just fully steps into his humanity. I love even how Father Richard Rohr does a take on Jung and even this Pauline principle. He calls it the false self, and he says the false self is all those things we're attached to, but they're not our real and true soul. So our shadows are not the villains. They're just parts of us that are hidden or unhealthy or undeveloped with our journey to wholeness. And if we avoid them like it's an awkward acquaintance at a party or a grocery store, we're never going to learn from them. They are never going to speak amazing things about awakening. Because any transformation, any change, any move towards health, it's never going to come from hiding or avoiding. It's about bringing these things into light. So how do you integrate your weaknesses? Stop resisting your weaknesses and befriend them. So what can you do? Well, as I've said, stop fighting, stop struggling, actually lean into them. Acknowledge the doubts, the fears, the imperfections, and try to do it without judging yourself. Try not to see these things as enemies. What would it be like if you saw your shadows as teachers? What if you asked, this is not something I need to fix. It's actually something I need to understand. And what if you could hold space for your weakness, your shadow, and allow it to teach you? And I'll tell you what, this really, really matters, because resisting your shadow, your weakness, I'm telling you, and the studies show, it's only going to give it more power. It's only going to continue to rob more of your true self from you. And as we see, Christ didn't deny his humanity, he embraced it. And in doing so, he showed us how to live fully. And when you begin to do this, you know, self compassion starts to lift up, shame starts to go down. There's a deeper trust in yourself, there's a deeper trust in God's presence. And you just see the messy, unfinished places as something that moves you forward. And I actually do love how modern psychology, all the research, all the studies showed that our ancient Christian tradition, which revealed this to us, that, man, don't try to erase these things. If you do, it's actually more disruptive. Integrate your humanity, your shadows. This is how they won't end up controlling us. So embrace them, befriend them. And, let me just share a few other ways that we can integrate them. Let's be real about our shadows, right? We usually would rather ignore them, but that isn't always easy. And the key to a spiritual, deeper life, as the scriptures teach us, certainly research and psychology, is we need to move forward in them. So let me give you another roadmap. So not only embrace them, name your shadow. Actually be specific, name it. Pay attention to what triggers you. Is it fear? Is it self-doubt? Is it approval? Is it perfectionism? Begin to ask yourself, man, what am I avoiding? What parts of me am I trying to hide? Maybe even write it down, but name it, own it, stop running from it. And I'll tell you what, why this matters is if you ignore it, it's going to control you more, as I've been saying. And again, just like we see Jesus wade into the waters in his baptism, he waded into the fullness of his humanity. No shortcuts. And I'll tell you, you'll start to see more self-awareness, more inner peace. You'll have a deeper compassion to yourself, deeper connection with God. Here's one last one. It's dealing with your inner critic. And it's actually also befriending our inner critic. A lot of times our issues aren't external. It's the voice we have in our head that tells us we're not enough or speaks criticism to us. And this voice can just move out of the shadows from the very disowned, disavowed places in our life that we're trying to reject. That's where they can speak from. So again, just like Christ stepping into the waters of his full humanity, it's good when we wade into our own shadows, but not with condemnation, actually with a radical self-acceptance. So here's what you could do. That voice in your head telling you you're not enough, instead of fighting it, shutting up, just acknowledge it. But you don't have to listen to it. Don't let it run your life. But instead of shutting it down, get curious about it. What is this critical voice trying to protect me from? What is it saying to me? And then respond with self-compassion. Move shame aside. I'll tell you what, why this matters is this way you don't see your weaknesses as flaws. You don't see them as stop signs. They actually become road signs to go this way. They speak to us about something. They speak to us about maybe an undeveloped part of our identity. And when you continue to do this, self-condemnation goes down, more confidence arises. So here's the deal. When we do deep shadow work, it doesn't come by fixing ourselves, but it's about awakening to who we truly are. And when we face our shadows with compassion towards ourselves, that critical inner voice and those unhealthy patterns, they begin to lose their grip, and you begin to grow deeper spiritually. You're more centered in yourself. And so let's integrate our shadows. Let's move beyond fear to wholeness. Let's trust that even in the struggle, we are loved by God. So today, may God bless you. May you embrace your weakness, your shadow. Actually, may you already today go, this is the specific shadow I'm going after. And when it gets to you, rest a bit and get back up and keep moving towards connection with God, deeper compassion, and connection with yourself. And you will begin to awaken more and more. You will grow more resilient. You'll be deeper connected to God and to yourself and to then the world around you. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next week. Peace.